Well, unlike many that mention about how they were brought to hear the Christian truth at university, I was one of those ones who rejected it firmly when I was at university. Very rude to Christians, I'm afraid. After university, I was very disillusioned and didn't know really what life was all about. I went off traveling for 2 years, backpacking around the world. I started off working in the Middle East, and then from there went on to Southeast Asia. I spent 6 months or so traveling around Southeast Asia, ended up working in Bangkok, teaching English there. And whilst there was a searching going on, a fascination with the Eastern religions, there was also, I think, a shock at the poverty, particularly of the sex trade in Thailand, and all kinds of depravity that one cannot mention here. I went on from there to Australia. I was working, I couldn't get a visa there. Not the only one to have problems with visas, but I couldn't get a visa to work there, so I was working for a company selling artwork door to door. I would pose as the artist and pretend to tell all these stories about the art that I had supposedly made. It was a kind of lifestyle that was sort of cut off from upright society. My friends, if you like, were misfits, criminals, prostitutes, gang members. It was quite a dangerous form of friends that I had. The people who worked with me were drug addicts. A couple of them had met in a halfway house coming out of prison. And whilst I tried to keep this one chap from going off to get his fix, I was finding myself more and more taking cannabis and sort of going on a downward path. Back, I guess, after 2 years of travelling and longing for meaning to life, I found that coming back into English society, no one really wanted to talk about serious issues, the deep things of life. And so I split again for Austria, and while out in Austria, I spent the whole season just skiing, partying. Drugs were never that far away, and just spending all this money I'd earned while I was in New Zealand. Towards the end of the season, I met a beautiful woman, and whilst we were smoking a hash pipe mixed with opium, we were discussing spiritual things. I was telling her about my desire to change the world. I wanted to get into politics. I thought maybe I could finance myself. I was planning to go back into the futures industry to do that. And she said, "You need power to succeed in that. I can give you that power." She went on to tell me how she had made a deal with the devil, and he had got her out of her problems. She, together with a Swedish lad, had stolen a big BMW and driven down from Scandinavia down to Austria. And there in this little ski town, this man had come to the car. They'd seen him as they drove through the beginning of the village, and then they got to the other end, and there he was again. And he had come over and he said, "Oh, nice car. Now you have to fulfill your part of the bargain." This man terrified these Swedish lads. One of them I'd been skiing with the whole season. My friend Håkan was pleading with me, "Stay away from her. Have nothing to do with her." I was like, "Why? She's gorgeous." I didn't listen. I paid off her debts. I brought her back to London. Well, we arrived back in London. Oddly, no one really wanted me coming and staying with them. Not really surprising, the way that I was living my life at that time. So we were staying in this little hostel in Bayswater. There were quite a number of Christians there. And one of the Christians, while I was washing up dishes in the hostel, asked me, "Have you ever thought about Jesus? Have you ever thought about who he is, what he said, what he did?" That's all she said. But that question was going round and round in my head. I couldn't get away from it because I knew the truth was I never had. I'd grown up with religion. My dad was an Anglo-Catholic priest. I knew the form of service, the words off by heart. But the reality of Christianity, Didn't know any of it. Well, she was witnessing to me on the one side, whilst on the other side, this woman that I was involved with was beginning to threaten me with the same power she had offered to help me succeed, that if I didn't do what she said, she had the power to curse me. We began talking about God, and she said to me, "What do you think God thinks of you? God doesn't want you. Just think about how you live your life." She even read the Bible to me. "Do not be deceived. He who is sinful is of the devil, because the devil has been sinning from the beginning." I felt utterly cut off from God. I knew I had broken all his commandments. I hadn't murdered, but everything else, and I had boasted as much. And now here I was, absolutely terrified, with this woman threatening me with power. There was an evil presence of this woman that was terrifying. Everyone in the hostel was terrified of her. To put it in context, some of the situations I had been in Bangkok, most of us would think, yes, very dangerous, but this woman was so evil. I was terrified. Well, one day she was shouting and screaming at me, saying that now I hadn't known what I was playing with, now I was going to suffer. And I said to her, "I don't believe that you or anyone else has more power than God. If anyone is going to do anything, it will be him, not you." She was silenced. Where did those words come from? I can only say it was as though God spoke in that situation, silencing her. Well, we went on talking for many hours, and later in the night we went downstairs, and there was an American lad staying in the hostel, and he said, "Oh, wow, I'm buzzing, man." And I was like, "What are you buzzing about?" And he went on to explain he'd been to a Bible study. Talk to her. She's the one that needs sorting out, I thought. And so he spoke to us for probably a couple of hours, well into the early morning hours. He told us, yes, Satan is real, but that Jesus defeated Satan when he died on the cross and rose again. He told us lots and lots of other stuff. Most of it went over my head. But then at the end, he said, "Look, give me your hand." And I went to shake hands with him. He took her hand, and he just started to pray. "Father, these folk need your help." And for the first time in months, there was this glimmer of hope that somehow I was going to escape from this relationship. The following days, I wept and wept at the mess my life had become. I was broken. All my self-confidence was gone. Part of it was realizing that this woman was pretty much like a reflection of me. Yeah, I hadn't made a deal with the devil, but the way she lived, the lies, the manipulation, it was like a reflection of myself. Well, this lad invited us to go to a Bible study, and I went along. And there was this little group sitting around, reading the Bible, singing, praying, listening to the Bible. It was the first time I'd ever encountered what I would call real Christianity. It was so different from the formality I'd grown up with. The warden was very astute. He recognized what sort of person I was, and he gave me a little book, In Search of God. And this really, I guess, was largely like going through John's Gospel, but there were other things as well. And through that, I was confronted for the first time with the claims that Jesus made. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." That was very relevant for me. I was thinking about Krishna and Buddha and Islam and all these other religions. And here was Jesus saying, "I am the only way." And then I went on and read how he'd been asked by Philip to show him the Father, and he says, "How long have I been with you and you still don't know me? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." And later, "I and the Father are one." And there's this realization dawning on me that this Jesus is not just a man, but he is in fact God in human form. There was a lot of other things I was thinking, well, how could I be a Christian? But gradually, one by one, this author demolished all my arguments, and I was brought to this verse, famous verse from Revelation 3:20. I stand at the door and knock, and if you open the door, I will come in and eat with you. And I knew I couldn't run away. I felt like Jesus is knocking on my door in that little hostel. I didn't want to run away anymore, and I prayed and I asked for him to forgive me and to come into my life. What a relief. Immediately, it seemed, people could see a difference in me in the hostel. Some people said that when I first arrived, they were actually quite afraid of me. And for me, it was like suddenly being an adult being an infant in an adult body. It was like suddenly all my barriers had gone, all my protection had gone. I felt very vulnerable, but I knew that Jesus was with me. But I still hadn't really quite got the cross. And as I was reading in another book about how I could be forgiven, how Jesus had died on the cross for my sin, well, the tears again began to stream down my face. This is how I'd been forgiven. All the filth of my life, the drunkenness, the sleeping around, the adulteries, the prostitutes, the lies, the stealing, the arrogance. The list just seemed endless. And Jesus had taken all of it on himself and suffered my punishment. Why? Because he loved me so much. Having come to a point when I wondered if anyone could like me, never mind love me, here I found that God himself loved me. Well, that's missing out quite a lot, but I know I've gone over time as usual. I'm sorry for that. Thank you.